Good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Rocky. Welcome to this webinar this morning. It's Thursday morning. Trialogue hosts these virtual webinars on the last Thursday of every month. And this Thursday, we're working in partnership with TICSA, the Teacher Internship Collaboration of South Africa. And we're talking about collective impact and how this has been adopted to bring about systemic change in the education sector. While people are joining and clicking in, just a few technical points. There are two ways to engage us on this call. Firstly, you can use the chat function to connect with fellow delegates, to share your thoughts, to add perspectives as you are stimulated through the discussion. But we also ask you to raise questions through the Q&A. So I'll be monitoring the Q&A. And draw on those questions and put those questions to the panelists when we get to the discussion section of the webinar. Try and keep your questions to the point and relatively succinct. And you're welcome to sort of target a question at a particular panelist if you wish to do so. A short survey will pop up at the end of the session through a link. We welcome you to share your thoughts on the webinar, on future topics that may be of interest to you, so that we can improve the sessions going forward. And then just to note that the session is being recorded. The notes and the slides and the recording will be made available to everyone that registered. Okay, so if we can just go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so the format for today is I'll be facilitating the session, but I'm also going to be just providing a perspective on this concept called collective impact, and I'll do that next. And then we're going to hand across to Zara McDonald, who'll provide an overview of the TICSA, which is the case study that we're working on, and provide some background to that. I'll introduce the panelists when we get to those. And then we'll get into a moderated Q&A session and final closing comments. So that's the format for the day. We plan to run until around 10:30 and enjoy the discussion up until that point. So some input to start with, and then and getting into a more discussive part of the program. So first, we're just wanting to just check who's in the room. And I know that people probably still are joining. But for those that are on the call, could we just run a quick poll just to see what kind of organizations are represented in the discussion? So if we can just put up the poll and people can just tick where they and who they're represented. We'll give it a minute. Okay, so we'll just one more second, and then we will cut that and share the results shortly with you. Okay, let's end it there. Thank you for inputting there. And let's just go to we'll show those results shortly. Let's just go to the next slide. The next one, keep going. Okay, just a little bit about who we are. For those that don't know us, Trialogue is a business that works in the sort of interface between business and society. We provide advisory services around CSI, integrated thinking, ESG, monitoring and evaluation, corporate reporting, integrated reports, etc. And then we have knowledge sharing platforms, which are very easy to engage us through our conference, the webinars, which we run monthly, the Knowledge Hub, and we will put the results of this survey up on our Knowledge Hub, as well as through other platforms which you'll be made aware of. and then the Business and Society Handbook, which comes out at the back end of this year. And then we move on, and I think I'm going to go into a discussion now on just a little bit of perspectives on the topic of collective impact. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so why collective impact? So the prevailing developmental context as we see it is a CSI sector which is characterized by multiple initiatives, and often these initiatives are operating, or mostly operating, in isolation, often with very similar agendas. So initiatives around teacher development, around early childhood development, around supplementary maths and science programs, bridging programs, bursary type programs. But very often operating on their own in isolation, some big, some small, some loosely clustered within a space, some operating more independently. And the barriers to collaboration, although collaboration is often spoken about, but doesn't come naturally to the sector. Primarily, some of the reasons, and there may be many others, but companies typically funding these organizations often want to mark out their own identity, their brand, their association to particular initiatives. So it's less attractive if they get lost within an initiative where there are multiple funders and they are not able to stand out. NPOs, on the other hand, invest substantial time and effort in their methodologies, the intellectual property, and in securing funding, and maybe reticent to give that away or to compromise that in any way. And government, just the sheer scale of government and the fact that government has the primary mandate for development and education, etc., often finds it difficult to engage in multiple small initiatives. I remember the Minister of Basic Education once saying that she really commended the work of the private sector in supporting these initiatives, but she could not give an audience to all of these organizations, often that they were just too small to absorb the time and energy that would take in terms of engaging with government. So you end up with a sort of lack of collaborative partnerships, which often result in sometimes simplistic linear processes which are symptomatic in nature. Teaching is not, math teaching is not at a level, so people try and address that particular issue, or infrastructure at a school or an ECD center is not up to standard, so we address that particular issue. Some of these solutions are therefore not holistic, and therefore difficult to scale or systemize on the back of those initiatives, just through the size and the fact that they're not necessarily holistic completely. The other factor that we see is the lack of evidence of success and efficiency. So often we don't know exactly how good or how well or poorly these initiatives are performing. If we ask organizations, do you do M&E? Have you got some sort of record of your work? The answer is typically yes, but when one goes down and looks at the M&E outcomes, the results of reports, often they're inconsistent or difficult to assess in terms of exactly what the outputs look like, due to the relative cost, the different approaches, and the inconsistency around those sort of evaluations, and the need to sort of isolate what the intervention can be, what sort of benefits can be attributed to the intervention itself. Often you end up with narrow scope of evaluations, and with all of these factors, it's very difficult within a particular sector, developmental sector, to compare notes across interventions and get a sense for how that's working. So often you hear the sort of refrain that, wow, you're spending 10 billion rand a year on corporate social investment. How do we see the benefits of that? We can't see them. And it's not that the benefits aren't there, it's just that they're difficult to aggregate and to quantify and to actually explain. And it's very typical of the sector. So if we have limited opportunity to solve for complexity, What that really means is that we need to do so, more integrated solutions. We need multiple players to come together. We need players with different skill sets to come in together to drive an agenda with common goals and alignment of processes. So that's where we are, and that sets the scene, I think, for collective impact in the discussion. If you go to the next slide. So I've drawn here from a paper that came out of the Stanford Innovation Review by FSG Social Impact Advisory Services, and there's a link there. There's a good information on this topic. By following that link, you can there's good insights, and I've just drawn one or two points from this. But what is advocated in this paper was that as a potential solution to achieve this collective impact approach, you involve 5 key elements. Firstly, a common agenda. What is alleged that the collaboration exists, but often collaboration exists with people's own agendas and own vested interests at heart. And what collective impact requires is that common agenda becomes the actual driving force, the key aspect that people rally around. So it's not just collaborating around your own organization, but it's actually saying, okay, let's think what the common agenda is. What do we exist for? And shift into that common agenda. And that's what would define the difference between sort of just general collaboration and a collective impact agenda. Common understanding of the problem, a shared vision, agree on that, and then reposition the organizations within this to actually achieve that and chase that agenda. It requires shared measurement, and this is important. So collecting data, measuring results, understanding exactly what's working, what's not working, what can be refined, how accountability is playing out across the different stakeholders in the ecosystem. Mutually reinforcing activities, so different approaches, but all reinforcing around that common agenda. So the different players coming together and providing their own skill sets, their own capacity to reinforce the whole, the individual parts, all reinforcing a common whole. Continuous communication with multiple players. This is one of the challenges of the space of a collective impact approach, is that one needs to bring a lot of players on board and along down this journey, and that can only happen with continuous communication. And then what is advocated is a backbone support, and an organization that actually exists to support this process, so that everyone in the process has got the support of an organization whose sole responsibility is to drive this. They wake up, that is their job, their day job. And without a backbone organization, the ability to collaborate and pull people along this journey becomes near impossible. Go to the next slide. I won't spend too long on this slide, but just the process that the stages and the elements that to drive a collective impact approach. So the components, they say, for success: governance and infrastructure, planning, community involvement, evaluation and improvement. Again, the monitoring and evaluation coming through. And then with each of these different stages. So initially, no formal structures, you're getting stakeholders together, you're dialoguing about what's required, you're getting people in, you're determining, whether there's a need for this. And then initiating action, identifying the champions, starting to form a steering committee, mapping the landscape, etc. And then organizing for impact, creating the backbone infrastructure, formally setting it up, setting up the working groups, etc. Agreeing the common agenda, the goals, the strategic priority, the terminologies that you're even talking about, and then engaging and building, and then establishing those shared metrics. And that is difficult to do, but it's an important part of it. And then obviously rolling it out, facilitating, implementing, continued engagement, collecting, tracking, reporting what's working, what's not working. Now you're getting the benefit of actually the common metrics coming out, and you can then look at that sector as a whole and saying what's working, what's not working, etc. Let's go to the next slide. Structural elements. So the key structures, steering committee would be essential, provide the strategic oversight, represent all stakeholder interest, guidance to the backbone organization, and holding the backbone organization to account to do the work that they are required to do, review progress and refine processes as you go. The backbone organization with dedicated capacity to drive the process, manage stakeholder relations, critically mobilize funding, etc. And then the ecosystem of participants through shared knowledge and practices, the metrics, common metrics, access to networks, etc. And importantly, within that ecosystem, one needs to structure the relationships so that everyone benefits from being involved. If organizations are threatened, or if the effort associated with collaborating within this collective impact initiative is greater than the benefits that can be derived, it's going to be difficult to keep people in the system. So at the end of the day, this backbone organization has to structure things that individual organizations are not threatened, their livelihoods are not threatened, and that there are clear benefits that flow to those that get involved. And then a last slide. So what are the points of resistance, the potential barriers? Firstly, it takes time. This doesn't happen quickly. You can't just get in, build a building, and sign off on the project. It takes time to drive this process. It requires additional indirect funding. The backbone organization does require some funding, and that's not funding that goes directly to beneficiaries. And that sometimes could be a barrier for organization. It requires substantial effort in building and maintaining relationships, because there's so many players coming from different organizations and different cultures, and some have very different attention and interests in cooperating and being part of this initiative. So it requires a lot of effort to actually bring people on board, bring these organizations in, and maintain them within this collective impact initiative. The results aren't immediate and diluted to some extent because it's a longer term influence, and it's because it's holistic, and because there are so many elements to a collective impact approach. It's not as immediately transparent and clear that people in the development space might be used to or looking for. It's an unfamiliar process. Budgets aren't necessarily used to being allocated to a backbone organization or to a collective impact approach. Given the typical grant making norms in the space, what corporates typically are used to, and it may cause for some degree of compromise. If you've got a whole lot of organizations in a particular space and you've got a common agenda, that common agenda may not align 100% with each organization. So some compromise may be required. So overall, for a collective impact approach to succeed, the benefits really need to outweigh the collective effort of the individual participants in that system. And I'll leave it there. It is feedback from the next slide. Do you want to just flash it up so everyone can see who's in the room? And then we're going to go across to Zara, who's going to give you a perspective on TICSA. Are you able to show the results in? Okay, we'll come back to that later. If you can move on, and we'll come back to showing the results of the poll. And Abdullah, if you can get the presentation back up, and then we can switch across to Zara, please. Zara, you're up.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Abdullah, I'll need to share from my side. Thanks. Carry on. Nick.
Okay, so Zara McDonald from JET, who's one of the convening partners that we work with on a regular basis on this initiative, and she'll take you through a little bit of background on TICSA. So over to Zara.
Okay, thanks, Nick, and thanks, Abdullah, for organizing all of this. Thanks to Trialogue as well. Okay, so Nick has provided an overview of collective impact. TICSA, the Teacher Internship Collaboration South Africa, is an example of a collective impact project. And I think all of the barriers and the challenges that Nick mentioned, I think we've come across in TICSA, but that's not what I'm going to be speaking about today. I'll be providing an overview. I do think that it was really useful to have that overview of collective impact before I speak about TICSA. I also think that notwithstanding the barriers, it is exactly, or maybe because of those barriers, it's exactly why collective impact is important. And so you will see that although I'm doing the presentation of the overview this morning, many people have been involved in it exactly because it's collective impact, and all the names can't be mentioned even on the slide, but do know that it's a lot of intellectual, emotional, and really practical work that goes into this. Okay, so what is the common goal of TICSA? It's to demonstrate the extent to and conditions under which extended student-teacher internship models are an effective, efficient, and widely used, and that could be scalable modality of initial teacher education in public schools, specifically in South Africa. Because I've only got 10 minutes this morning, I won't be going into sort of the background of initial teacher education and all of that. So I'm assuming that those on the call are familiar with the process of learning to teach and initial teacher education in South Africa. But should you have any questions and need to understand the background, please do make contact with me, either through Trialogue or directly. And so by effective, we mean reduced teacher shortages in identified areas, produces knowledgeable teachers, and improved teacher retention and job satisfaction. So these are all challenges that are associated either with teacher education or the teaching profession generally. And it's hoped that, or it's expected that by having a more effective, efficient, and scaled up extended teacher internship program or modality of initial teacher education, that some of these could be addressed. And so how do we expect to get there in TICSA? We expect to get there by understanding which policies would support and be an enabling of the extended student-teacher internship model. We want to improve the knowledge base around effective extended student-teacher internship models, and we'll do this through research, and we are doing it through monitoring different implementing organizations' models, by supporting connections between historically discrete agencies and actors in the sector, by leveraging existing initiatives to improve impact through mutual reinforcement, and to have shared goals, shared tools, and shared knowledge. So why? Extended student-teacher internships are or can be auxiliary school-based routes to initial teacher education. qualifications that were established with the aim of developing well-prepared teachers capable of effective teaching. And so with an extended teacher internship, a student teacher would be spending a lot more time in a school than an average BEd or PGCE program would require. The throughput in distance education, initial teacher education, is not high. And from one project or one implementing organization, Save the Children, the DBTRS model has the district-based teacher recruitment model, which was based on an extended student internship program, did in fact demonstrate that the throughput of distance education was much higher for those students who were interns. The turnover of newly qualified teachers in hard to teach places is not high. And so the assumption is that if a student teacher spends more time while they are learning to teach in a school, they would become more experienced more experienced in the school, and once they are a newly qualified teacher, that they are more able to stay and more resilient. Learner outcomes and classroom practice is linked to compromised teacher quality. And of course, the links are not exactly clear, but that is some of the research that we are working with. And then teacher supply is also compromised. We know, of course, based on the research study, that in a few years, we're going to have a shortage of teachers. But what is TICSA not? It's not a particular model of extended teacher internships or a particular program. It's in the process of the collaboration and of the collective impact, looking at a range of models and a range of programs, gathering that data, monitoring that data, and then wanting to see which are more effective, which are more efficient, and which could be scalable. What are the elements of those models that could be scaled? So TICSA is not promoting a particular model. It is trying to understand and then also trying to support those that do exist in order to understand what can be efficient, what can be effective, and how it could be scaled. So it's not also proposing that extended student teacher internships should be the only pathway or route for initial teacher education. And it's definitely not proposing that extended student internships could be a silver bullet to the initial teacher education ecosystem. And so what does TICSA do? It's a system-wide collaboration and data-driven, so to drive improvement in initial teacher education, and particularly with respect to extended student teacher internships. It supports mutually reinforcing activities across discrete actors in the education sector towards this vision. And TICSA aligns the efforts of education stakeholders towards systemic improvement, including funders, implementers, higher education institutions, NGOs, and the private sector, in order to reach its goal, as explained in the introduction. And so this slide has all the stakeholders, all these discrete actors that I've been referring to. And so the convening group, which is the backbone that Nick referred to, consists of JET Education Services, Trialogue, Bridge, and the Bertha Center at UCT. There are strategic partners, funders, unions, NGO networks, research institutes. There are government partners or government organizations that provide support at various times, some more, some less. And they are implementing partners, and these are NGO implementers as well as higher education institutions. And the beneficiaries, according to this diagram, are expected to be the interns, the teachers or mentors, and learners. Although, if we gather the right research, the right data, are able to support the system and support the ITE ecosystem to deliver better teachers and to deliver higher quality teachers and more teachers, then everyone benefits. And so, in terms of what Nick shared, we've sort of in the TICSA work streams work on four work streams. So advocacy and governance, shared measurement and tools, sector-wide collaboration and innovation, and knowledge sharing. And important to the shared measurement tool is a TICSA monitoring tool that is really the critical part, or one of the critical parts, in being able to demonstrate whether extended student internships could be effective, efficient, and what of it could be scaled, as well as to what end. One of the knowledge products that have just been released is an implementation brief that support or that brings together a literature review that was completed in 2021, as well as a scoping study of implementing organizations that demonstrate what is happening in the sector at the moment. TICSA is working with a theory of change, which expects to impact the quality, commitment, and commitment of teachers towards an improved basic education system in South Africa. And a lot of the activities that I've spoken of are mentioned here, but I won't go through all of them due to time. Again, should you wish to know more, should you wish to have any further information, please do contact us afterwards. And so the steering committee is a critical part of TICSA, in as much as it takes a lot of time, and not only of the backbone organization in terms of logistics and communication, but also in terms of all of these partners. Everyone is there because they would like to see an improved system, yet it takes individuals times to represent these organizations, and is in a sense outside of their day job, but in the end would feed back into their day jobs and make a difference. So thanks very much for listening. I know this was a very quick overview of what TICSA is. Thanks for listening. Thanks for organizing this, Nick. And I will hand back to Nick.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Zara, and for that brief overview. And now that everyone is an expert and fully informed around collective impact, we're going to run a okay, so I think we're just showing the results of the first poll, so we can see that at the time of when we all came on board, non-profits were the predominant audience here, followed by consultants, which is great, and then probably equally represented between academics, big businesses, and SMEs. And then there's some others that are in the room, maybe some individuals as well. So that's who we have got in the room today. And we've got another question now that we are all more familiar with this process. And this is a curious question to us at Trialogue, and I'm sure for all of you in terms of the feedback. But if this is what collective impact's about, you understand some of the complexities around it, and you understand some of the benefits in terms of driving more systemic wholesale scale change, should it be implemented broadly across all developmental and education sectors? Should it be adopted more often, but wherever CSR programs align with government-led processes? So a little bit more selectively. Should it be adopted in rare cases, almost by exception, only when this case for systemic impact is absolutely apparent? Or should we just say, let's carry on with the status quo without attempting to go into this collective impact approach? So just a view from the audience around that, and then we'll share that a bit later. So if you can open that poll up. Thank you. Give everyone a chance. Click on the button. Don't be afraid to vote. We're nearly there. We've got 3/4 have participated. Just give it another 10 seconds. Okay, let's call it there. Okay, thanks very much. And we'll flash those results up just now, but generally a sense of support for collective impact. Okay, I'm going to now just introduce the panelists, and I'm going to ask each just to provide an opening perspective, and then we'll move more into the general Q&A. So just a reminder, I'm sure you've got questions, please put them up, and we'll get those questions asked just after this next slot. So firstly, up is Sarah Gravett, from former Dean and Professor of Education at the University of Johannesburg. UJ, one of the teaching institutions that has been a leader in this space around certainly distance education, and certainly has got some good perspectives on this topic. So I'm going to hand across to Sarah and ask her just to just provide a perspective from her organization.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you very much for the invitation. I will start by just giving a bit of background how UJ became involved in TICSA, because we come from a bit of a different space. But what that also illustrates that TICSA does not say one size must fit all. TICSA provides the opportunity for conversation, debate, for collaboration, but I'll get back to that. So, yes, I am the former Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg, and our involvement in TICSA and in what we call school-based teacher education stems from the work that we've been doing for many years on our Soweto campus with a school that we established on our campus, the Funda Uchabule School. The reason why we established that school was to have a facility that is similar to a teaching hospital, that you would have a teaching school. In other words, it's a school on the campus, and let me say it is a Gauteng Department of Education school, but it serves as a teaching practice site, also as a research site for our students. We viewed this as very important, particularly because of the difficulty that teacher education is facing worldwide of a theory-practice divide. And we were of the view that having this school on our campus could help to address that, to ensure that we coordinate what is happening in the coursework in our program with the practicum that happens in the schools, which involves a lot of observation, but interestingly, not necessarily the observation of the teachers, but particularly the observation of the kids, to understand how children develop over time. I could say something more about that if somebody is interested to know at a later stage. So since the inception of the program at our Soweto campus and the school, we have been researching what happened, the different iterations, and at some stage we realized that there is something that maybe could be replicated. And it was also the case that some schools actually asked us, what is the possibility for such replication? So what makes our program maybe a bit different than some of the other internship programs is that we work with a memorandum of agreement with a specific school, because we have a very clear program that must be rolled out also in the school that is similar to what we have at our campus. So our campus-based students and Soweto and our distance education students or school-based do exactly the same curriculum. To get to TICSA, I am not going to repeat some of the things that Zara said, just maybe to confirm that as an institution that is involved in TICSA, that we are experiencing that TICSA is bringing together different parties involved in internship. And that enables learning from each other. It enables thinking together, and this is done in particularly through the community of practice, which is very useful, where there could be the type of conversations needed to strengthen the internship programs. We also think this collective provide information to potential bursary providers to get a sense what is happening, because in the past, there are many different providers, but there was no way to understand who's doing what. And TICSA plays, in a sense, a role in helping with that. I wish to reiterate some of the words that Zara used, such as coordinating, bringing some alignment, bringing connections, working towards a shared goals, shared tools, shared knowledge. So these are the positives of TICSA. We are of the view that TICSA could in future even play a stronger role in terms of a think tank for teacher education. And let me then lastly say that even though I know that this is the case, it is important that it was emphasized that internships are not viewed as a silver bullet in teacher education, and that there are many other issues that play a role, not only how long a student teacher spends time in a school and whether this would make such a student teacher necessarily a better teacher. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And then if I can call on John Gilmore to come in. John is founder and board chairperson of the Global Teachers Institute, the GTI. I hope you can all hear me clearly. Sorry, if someone could just mute at the background. Yeah, if I can hand across to John, he's one of the GTI is one of the established programs in NPOs that offer solutions in the space. John, I think over to you. You'll do yourself more justice than I can do for you. So over to you.
Thank you very much. As one who is completely committed to the notion of collective impact, TICSA is a very exciting space to have been involved in co-creating and getting to this very important position where we have the possibility of the coordination of the sector that is so much needed. I think the question we need to answer is really the question around what does South African education need more than anything else? And the answer always comes down to it needs cohorts of inspired young teachers who can be adaptive, agile, flexible, and empathetic and caring. So we need to shift the way we thought about teachers, and this model gives us the opportunity to do that. So many of us have been working with teacher internship models for years, and it's exciting to be able to report that in that model, the connection between practice and theory, or if you like to use the Stanford model of the language of scholarship and clinical work, the integration of scholarship and clinical work in a 4-year program or a 2-year program of internship gives you opportunities that really run deep. One of the challenges in South Africa is that teachers who come out of education schools often aspire to teach only in very privileged, well-resourced contexts. We've got to change that. This model can help to change that. Instead of teachers doing predominantly theory work for 4 years and then being thrown into the deep end of the hurly-burly of a school in the 5th year, the opportunity of an internship gives those teachers the deep experience of understanding the rhythms, the rituals, the routines, and just the regular day-to-day running of the school. And so the learning in the first year of your involvement as an intern in a school is deep. And you're already asking yourself the question, should I be here? Is this what I'm called to do? The dropout rate of people coming out of universities, going straight into school, and then looking quickly for alternative ways of earning a living is too high. We need young people to be attracted into a profession that invites them to be social activists, invites them to come into spaces and to take responsibility for social responsibility programs. This is the work of partners like GTI, Kanyisa, ISASA, partnerships with Penreach. The strength of that is that these young people are immersed in the big questions of education. They're immersed in the ethics of education. They're immersed in the day-to-day struggle of education. And so for me and for us in the sector who are the practitioners making this work, this is exciting. And we see leaders emerging at a very young age because they've been thrown deep into the crisis. And I'd advocate that we really think hard about this assumption that you learn best when you're in a well-resourced environment. And you don't learn well when you're in a challenging environment. If we really believe that, and we train everyone in well-resourced environments, and then we send them into the under-resourced environments, we're setting them up for failure. TICSA provides a platform, a framework of collective impact where we can create a really flow, not just a trickle, a flow of young teachers, dynamic teachers into under-resourced spaces, and they become the champions of change. What an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. One of the sort of very early thinkers in the space and one of the drivers behind TICSA originally. So thanks, John. And now I'm going to just ask Makana Morageli from ABSA, who's in the Corporate Affairs and Education Reform part of ABSA, to provide a perspective from a corporate view. ABSA is one of the funders of TICSA, and as a corporate, we'll have different perspectives. So over to you, Makana.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for the invitation to share a perspective on this important issue, particularly drawing on the work that ABSA is doing. I think it's important to mention up front that I'm not speaking on behalf of corporates. It's really to offer a perspective from ABSA's point of view. And ABSA's strategic theme of being an active force for good in everything we do and contributing meaningfully to societies in which we operate really recognizes the notion of a collective impact approach to social change. And I think embedded in that is the realization that no single entity can solve complex. And I think that I would like to underline the issue of the notion of complex social issues. And interestingly, there's a growing trend that companies exist to create value for multiple interests in society and not just profit. And therefore, creating long-term shared value focuses on identifying that important connection between driving commercial value while at the same time realizing societal impact. And of course, societal challenges by their very nature are complex, they are persistent. And I think, as you mentioned in your brief, they require an understanding of the nature and extent of the problem. And I think this is an important point because often we tend to focus, we are quick to jump into solving the problem before really doing a proper in-depth problem analysis, to the extent that often we find ourselves putting our energies in solving symptoms of a problem and not the real problem. But also, the complexity means that, as you mentioned, they require a diversity of ideas and expertise, also a wide range of stakeholders and networks. And I cannot but emphasize the importance of a coordinated approach here. And I think in the discussion, it would be useful to actually go behind each one of these issues, because it's quite tempting and easy to say, create a common agenda or work towards a common goal. In practice, those who have been in the trenches of really connecting, coordinating and pulling the reins will tell you that it's not as easy as it looks. So in terms of our connection, therefore, with TICSA, we came into the space through our partnership and collaboration with Save the Children, who are driving the district-based teacher recruitment strategy, perhaps what I usually call simply a school-based teacher development in the Eastern Free State, Thabo Mofokeng area. And I think immediately there was a connection between ABSA and this initiative, particularly because the values were the same. There was an alignment in the strategy, which is absolutely crucial, that there must be connection to the strategy. The alignment in terms of our youth employability strategy, which really seeks to scale up and accelerate youth transitions into the workplace of the future. Particularly, I want to underscore the connection here, which really, one of which is the demand driven. Zahra has spoken to the issue of demand for teachers, but not just for teachers, but teachers who are qualified, who are of the highest quality possible. But also the connection was at the point of how teachers who went into this program were selected, the whole notion of matching teachers or candidates to areas where they are likely to succeed. So it was not just people who were following the money, but those who were interested into going in this space had to go through a rigorous selection process and were well matched to the teaching profession. Importantly, also the connection was at the point of training in the workplace, and hence the school-based approach, which is critically important. And this, for us, teachers who are in rural areas, importantly as well, to retain the talent of quality teachers in those areas, a point that I think John has just made. But also something that we don't often see, it was the adaptive nature of this initiative. The fact that we were able to learn, act and learn, reflect, change and adapt as the process unfolded. That really resonated with the recognition that social change or social issues or social phenomena are never a linear sort of sense. So the issue of scale is important to us. I wish I could, Nick mentioned scale and pace in the same sentence, but I think we're going to come back to that point. It's often not so straightforward. But importantly as well, the issue of influencing the system, which also resonates with the APSA youth employability strategy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ricardo. Thank you. I'm going to afford myself the privilege of just asking each of the panelists one question, and then we'll go to some of the Q&A. There are some questions coming through, and there's some other general questions that we'll also get to. But firstly, to Sarah, given that internships are central to the higher education process and very central to the work that you do at UJ, how did you see the relationship between independent internship programs and how those are brought together by TICSA, and how does that resonate or fit with your initial agenda of teacher internships? I mean, has it changed the way you are operating? Has it changed the way you're thinking about operating? Any thoughts on that?
Nick, no. We are now in our second year of implementation. So we've learned through the first year of implementation. It was a year of addressing the challenges, building the relationships with the schools, understanding what their needs are, understanding what our needs are. So it was not necessarily through TICSA, but it was through building the relationship with the schools, and in the process developing also the model. We are being funded by Zenex to research this program over 4 years. For us, it is quite important to emphasize that we don't think just placing students in schools would necessarily mean that they will be better teachers. And by that, I'm not saying this is what is generally happening. I'm just making the point that there are some people who say students must be in schools for longer, and then they will necessarily be better teachers. You know, John Dewey reminded us many, many years ago already that one should not equate experience and expertise. You can have lots of experience, but actually learn very little from that experience if the experience is not accompanied by deep reflection. And that is a point that I wish to make, that internship in itself is not going to lead to better teachers. It's about the quality of the mentoring that happens in the schools. It's about, from our point of view, how the university works closely with the schools. We think that is very crucial, that there should be this constant alignment and constant coordination. Through our conversations with the schools that we work with, we have learned that maybe the way that we've been doing this needs to be changed in this and that in the following way. So through the close collaboration with the school, the program as such is also strengthened.
Okay, and would it be fair to say then that as an academic institution, you're very keen on progressing that learning, and that TICSA affords you the opportunity to learn more through different experiences?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. And this is why I also emphasize the community of practice, where there is a lot of conversation happening. And this is also where one learns from how others do it. None of us have the answer. The TICSA collective helps us to have these important conversations to improve the system. And that is a very important role that TICSA plays.
Thank you. To John. John, one of the points I raised earlier was that often NPOs preserve their space. They stay in their comfort zone, keep their funders close to their chest. You've taken a very different stance. Right from the get-go, you recognize that there was a bigger purpose here, and you were one of the early players really to drive this whole process. In fact, you were one of the voices that really got it going. what drove you to move out of GTI's comfort space to share your knowledge? And GTI has been very supportive of this process, and not all the NPOs in the teacher internship space have been so. What was different about you, and why that approach from coming out of the GTI?
Yeah, thank you. I think the question of why does an NPO exist must be one that we keep asking ourselves. You know, Sarah spoke about reflective practice. I think NPOs have to develop a reflective practice too, to say, what's our purpose? Our purpose isn't simply to build a boutique or to build a successful example of what could be. Our success ultimately must be measured in terms of the contribution we make to creating new pathways for systemic impact. And that's why I'm so excited that TICSA has got to this point. You know, there's an integration of partners from government, from corporate sector, from implementing partners, from original thinkers, and from interested researchers, because we've got to find ways of leveraging systems change. And there's no mystery to the fact that what will be pivotal in terms of systems change in this country is a change in the way teachers approach the facilitation of learning. So doing the work in narrow silos is very important to cut your teeth, to get a sense of how your ideas are playing out. But once we started to have conversations with Judy Tate from Kanyisa, with the team from ISASA, and we'd started there way back, and with all the partners, all the NPOs represented here, we've all had conversations. We realized how much we could benefit from shared learning, how much we could benefit from not being competitors, but from being aligned and covering a much wider scope of work. So it's really to answer the big question: how do we collaborate for greater impact? And this vehicle gives us the hope that that will not just be an informal collaboration or a year-to-year, hand-to-mouth collaboration, but a long-term, systemically supported collaboration.
No, thanks, John. So it's really is about understanding and having that higher purpose as an NPO. And I'm sure not all do, and some do, but the ability to collaborate and coordinate efforts without a central body, I would imagine, is difficult to maintain the momentum.
Yeah, but it's part of our transformation. If we're talking about the transformation of education in South Africa, we must say what part of me needs to transform. And if I'm trapped in that narrow belief that this, you know, that model of rugged individualism is what's going to work in the NPO sector, then I'm in the wrong sector. We need to always be asking ourselves, who am I partnering with? Who am I connecting with? Whom can I share? With whom can I share? And whose sharing can I use? And that should be, you know, that should be institutionalized. So your question number 2 was a critical question. The answer must be wherever possible, we should be connecting and taking collective wisdom and collective alignment of intent.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much. Tumakano, so ABSA does support direct CSI programs, and now you are an investor in TICSA as well. So I think you may have covered it in your opening statement, but can you just give a sense? You are one of a few corporates that would fund and not into a backbone type organization, not directly into projects. How was that for your internal processes? I mean, did it take an adjustment? Was there resistance to shifting this way of funding? How did that sit as a company, and what makes you exceptional in this space?
Thank you, Nick. I think, again, the hook must be in the strategy, because I think that really gives us the direction and the marching orders in terms of how we straddle this notion of, as I said, commercial gain, but while at the same time realizing social impact. But I think maybe it's important to highlight that this for us is an evolution. So it's not sort of what I would call a pendulum swing, sort of abandon a single or isolated impact and then move whole scale towards a collective impact. Of course, that is an important direction, but I think it's important to understand that as the notion of isolated impact or single impact, they still have their place. I think investing in initiatives is still, or individual initiative is important, but this at the same time, we have to recognize that bigger challenge that no single entity can solve social issues on their own. Now, it's interesting just reflecting on what you're saying, that what we're beginning to learn is that we have a common goal ourselves. So to some extent, you could say that we are acting as that coordinated entity ourselves. But amongst the programs that we offer, we have been starting to extract what could be common. What are the common issues in youth employability? Because I want to locate TICSA in this instance within that broad framework of youth employability. So what are the common threats? And interestingly, the common threats are coming from different sectors. We fund programs in the digital space, in the artisan space, teacher education, as well as food security and others. But we are learning and evolving and realizing that out of these could actually come what insights that could inform collective impact. So internally, we've been kind of alive to the realization that we are not running discrete programs, but there are common threads across. And that also has begun to permeate the rest of the business. I mean, Absa Bank is a big company, and there's always the risk of a silo mentality. But I think in our approach, as I said, we are evolving. We are beginning to really tap into the expertise and the knowledge and the resources that sit in other businesses. And I think that's why I'm saying the irony of it, we are almost emerging ourselves in corporate affairs as that entity that is pulling the reins. But of course, we would not be fooled that we can actually do it, because it is hard work. Let's make no bones about that, because playing that coordination role is very difficult, because even when you have established a common goal, how interesting is it that even within TICSA, we keep going back to say, exactly what are we doing? What did we say we're doing? And then we go back, we go sideways, we find each other, we move forward again. So it's never sort of, once you've identified a goal, it's never signed and sealed, and therefore you've got to nail it. And I think another important lesson for us is that we have internal expertise ourselves within the organization. And we have really come out in the collaborative impact space as a co-creator. So the work and the relationship that we had with Save the Children was not of a funder who is throwing a check at a problem, but it was really us connecting and really engaging, because we understand the issues, but perhaps maybe Save the Children. And then now that we are in the bigger fold of TICSA, there are other perspectives that we can learn and draw from. And I think perhaps the last point, Nick, here is this issue of measurement is important. And more so as you transition towards this collective impact and the measurement of social impact, we have been really pushed quite hard to think very hard about how do you measure social impact, particularly in an environment where we can easily be very transactional in our approach. We want quick results, but social phenomena doesn't work that way often. As I said, it's complex, it zigzags, it's never a linear thing. So we are learning ourselves. As I say, we are evolving from single impact to collective impact. But at the same time, we do realize that single impact, you can learn a lot from those individual programs and then aggregate towards bigger, towards scale. Thank you.
So thank you. Yeah. So it is about strategy and it's about ambition. And and if the strategy is set at a sufficiently advanced level, then the entry into a TICSA type initiative becomes more obvious, I guess. And also the role. And I think funders play very different roles. And it's not to say one is necessarily right or wrong, but from symptomatic short-term funding to this approach of partnerships and learning. And applying knowledge, and I'm hearing you saying that, which is encouraging. I'm just going to go to 2 questions. I'm just going to raise them. Amira Iliberi has raised 3 questions, and just to say that the questions will be put to the panelists who will be invited to respond directly to them. Some of the questions are quite specific. But I'm going to just bring one question up from Amira and then one from Alex Smith and just open it up to the panelists, whoever wants to comment. What are the measures of success other than student outcomes, which is maybe a specific short-term measure? What does TICSA care about or value in teaching? So how would we see success of TICSA? I know that Zara put up a theory of change, but just opening that up for comment. And then from Alex Smith, what is the dropout rate of teachers that don't take up teaching? And I guess, Alex, one of the things that we'd like to discover is what is the difference in the dropout rate of teachers that comes through the different streams, in terms of their take up of teaching. But any comments from the panelists on any panelists? They just don't just start talking. You just don't need to put your hand up. But any comments on any of those 2 questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. When we know that 60% of teachers coming into the system in South Africa are coming through UNISA, through distance learning, we've got to get our heads around that. How do we enhance the quality of that supply chain? So TICSA brings a real potential solution for that. When we also know that only something in the region of, I think it's as low as 30% of people who sign up for education at UNISA in the first year will come out as teachers, will graduate as teachers. So the dropout rate's enormous. Now, in the context of the programs that are run by the people currently working as potential operating partners within the TICSA framework, we're all talking about 80 to 90% retention rates in the initial phases of our work, which span probably a 10, 12-year span. So I think the early indications are retention high, and then the quality element, we've got to start to measure what matters. Can we start to try and measure the loving capacity of our teachers, the ability to be present, to be empathetic, to be caring, to be able to hold
the measures become more tricky, but they're still important. Right?
Absolutely, and you can balance them. Obviously, the hard-edged numbers are easy to measure in terms of pass rates, distinctions, all those kinds of things, and even how many people find jobs and where they find jobs. Those are the easy things to measure. But I'll give you an example. In the LEAP schools, we've got 6 schools. We've had 3 young principals come out of the Global Teachers Institute, and they're leading schools at the age of 30. So for me, that's a measure. That's not just an anecdote. It's an important early example of what's truly possible.
Yeah, and it'd be lovely to track those measures
Absolutely.
Across all the programs, and that's what we're hoping to do. Anyone else want to come in on either of those 2 questions? Should I?
I think Zara will probably also come in, but again, maybe to emphasize that TICSA has this coordinating role, has this role of bringing different role plays together in conversations, etc. So TICSA does not have a mentoring model. This is not, the mentoring happens via the implementers, which would be the higher education institutions and whoever the implementer is in the field. Again, what the important role that TICSA play here is in the community of practice, where mentoring, for instance, could be discussed. But there's no prescribed mentoring model. And maybe also just to add on to what John said, and for raising the very important point of the very high percentage of teachers entering the teaching professor through UNISA. And that we need to understand what that means for the teaching profession and how we can strengthen the teaching profession through strengthening the work that is being done at UNISA.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Anyone else? Sorry, do you want to come? Sorry, come in, Rakana.
I think from my side, Nick, it's really, and I don't know how this would stack up on the success ladder, but I think when we are able to extract from these experiences the non-negotiables for quality teaching or quality teacher development, that would be a success. And obviously, I need to quickly say that this is not really to pigeonhole teacher training approaches into one model, but I think we can all agree that while there may be variations in approaches, but they are until and unless we understand, we have that uniform understanding, then we will have this disparate approach and then variances in the quality of teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Nick, if you would allow me for one moment, because many people might not be aware of this, that there's another collective that is happening, and I'm sure if the DHET could join today, and I know they were invited, to also talk about the so-called PrimTET, which is an initiative from the DHET together with higher education institutions, where there's focusing on primary school teacher education, where there is a collective effort to, for instance, develop standards for teacher education in specific subject areas. So this collective also works in the field and to make collective impact.
Yes, and I think that's a good point. You know, this is not, there are so many different models of collective work going out there. We've seen it at a corporate level, where corporates have abandoned the, set up a foundation which does not carry their corporate brand name in order to attract other funders into that. So RCL and the Dubois Foundation does that. The NECT is a collective process. There are other collective processes out there. So this isn't the only model by any stretch, but I think some of the principles probably remain very much intact across those. And that's an important point. We speaking a lot of the advantages and the benefits, but it's not necessarily, I think it's been alluded to and said, that this is not it's not a slam dunk. It takes time, effort, process. TICSA's been in formation, and we've been probably talking through this collective impact approach now for 3-4 years now at least. Any thoughts on the challenges? What are any experiences that you might find frustrating, difficult, time consuming? Any comments on what people need to be aware of and conscious of going into a collective impact approach? Anyone?
Should I go because I'm?
Yeah, you're smiling away there, so you can start.
Okay, I think it's not a disadvantage. You see, my approach to this, as I said, it really sits within that idea of evolving and learning, reflecting and adjusting. And interestingly, it's a bit of a dilemma for me, in the sense that when, say, a funder contributes X amount of funds, obviously that for us to be able to account for that, it would have to be that the results are X, Y, Z. Let's say, for example, we are contributing towards developing a monitoring tool. Now, obviously, and again, it speaks to an issue that we are still sort of learning about, this multi-year funding approach vis-a-vis the annual funding, which is obviously based on the funds that are available. So when we contribute X amount to develop a tool, and that tool, together with other activities that the collective would have agreed on, takes a bit of a long time to realize. Now, how does one then go back and account, or do you say, you have to give me evidence, Zara, for the contribution that I've made here, because then I have to account, internally. Having said that, you can't really do that because your contribution, that individual contribution, is part of that bigger picture which we are trying to achieve. So for me, it's an interesting dilemma, but also it begins to point to where some of the shifts have to happen, so that the notion of multi-year funding that is flexible, that accommodates these kind of social programs, because indeed, in any kind of a collective, there are new issues that pop up that perhaps we may not have thought of in the initial stage. So the dilemma for me is, do I jump up and down and say, I've given X amount and therefore report on that, or do I say, hold your horses until such time that the bigger picture has been achieved? Because if you remove your contribution, you are compromising the bigger picture. That's my dilemma.
Thank you. And just to reinforce that, so we do see sometimes the will within the corporate affairs CSR teams, but often the executive structures are saying, well, we want to see the impact now. We want to see it more direct. We've got to account for those governance structures. So those can be potential barriers. I'm going to ask a last question, and you're welcome to comment on that question. Or the one I'm going to ask now, or any other point of view, but we're going to move into a sort of a closing opportunity for each of the panelists to just sort of come in with any thoughts or any response to questions. Just to look at the board there, Herman Mayer says less than 50% of final year teaching students end up in personal public schools. That was just an observation. And then Pam Picken asks a question. Early childhood development is critical to enable further success in school and life, and yet only 0.3% of South Africa's education budget is spent on learning. It's a much more unstructured, complex environment than formal education, and desperately needs a collective impact approach. What advice can this panel give us to get action started in this sector? And that is a general question, and we asked a question, and Abdullah, while the panel feedback, maybe you can put up the response to that, is to what extent does collective impact apply to other sectors? What are the lessons that we can take out of this? So I'm going to leave it really up to the panel members, and we can go in the same order, starting with Sarah, and just going through each of the panelists, just in any closing comments, any final thoughts, any response to those questions or issues raised. So yeah, if we can pick up with Sarah. Thank you.
How can we also have a similar structure, maybe similar structure in early childhood development? You need leadership in the first instance, people who would take the initiative to bring people together. And then secondly, you need persistence, because it is absolutely not easy. I can also remember the first meetings of TICSA, where, we were trying to find the way and thinking, what really is this about? So persistence and leadership, and the willingness, as you said before, to sometimes put your own priorities a bit aside for the bigger, in service of the bigger picture. Then maybe just a last thing from my side. Even though I think collective impact and collectives are crucially important. If we didn't think that, we would not have been involved in the TICSA process. But what we have been finding is that there is a tendency of some funders to only give money to collective initiatives. And I do think that has sometimes unintended consequences, because funding available for new innovative projects in the field of education that could make a difference in future become less, because the money goes into the collectives. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. John.
Well, and just to go back, I think the challenge of what's difficult in the short term, there's a money issue. We can only grow the work as fast as the money becomes available. And so there's still confidence issues around whether the money is best spent in the collective or in the work itself. And I think that needs to be resolved. There needs to be a very strong agency in the collective for spending into the initiatives that have already begun and proven themselves. And I think that will also TICSA will begin to eliminate the unnecessary replication of mentor models, of research being done into all of these elements. Once we get ourselves into a more coordinated framework, these things will become shared and will reduce the costs of the individual projects. And then just as closing around the ECD, I think TICSA should hold its focus. And I think that the learning from TICSA should be applied to any potential forum that is emerging in the ECD sector. And they are emerging forums. I know that Bridge has a very extensive community of practice around early childhood development. And yesterday was in a conversation around the potential of launching such a forum. But I don't think it should become under the ambit of TICSA, because that will make TICSA a multi-focused entity. It needs to retain its focus, but all the learning should be what can transfer, even if it's just principles, should transfer into any attempt to coordinate work. And of course, in the early childhood development, it's about registration. It's not just about training. It's about getting entities on the map and getting them into a funding space. So it is a different challenge, but an equally important one. And thanks for the opportunity. Much appreciated, Nick.
Thank you, John, and for those words of wisdom. We see here that the sentiment around collective impact, it should be implemented broadly across all development spaces, was the overwhelming response, or 48% of the response, or adopted more often where CSR programs align with government. 33% adopted by exception, 19% no one felt it shouldn't be adopted at all, which is interesting. And just to overlay on what John was saying, TICSA was formed and it has got a very specific focus. It had the advantage of a lot of the models already being in place and being funded in the space. So it was coming in as a convening body as opposed to really trying to establish practice in a particular space. And that did, I think, advance. It didn't make it less complex, but it certainly, provided a good start and rationale for the formation of TICSA. Makana, over to you for a final word, and then I'm going to ask Zara just to close briefly.
Thank you, Nick. And I think briefly, for me, at a high level, the collective impact approach can work. It needs to be encouraged, but we need to be quite robust in learning and reflecting as we go to avoid this notion of just kind of attaching names to things. In the education sector, people would speak about skills accords. When they didn't work, we renamed them. Now we hear people talking about social compacts, and one might wonder, what is collective impact? So I think it's important that when we have collective impact, we continually reflect and learn and really demonstrate the successes incrementally, because I think a 5-year range is way too long. It's just too far for me. I can't even sort of visualize it, but it can be done.
So thank you. To have outcomes that are shorter term, even though you might have a longer term vision would be
Exactly.
important.
Let's adopt a scaffolding
Mm.
approach on this.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Zara, closing comment, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Nick, and thanks to all the panelists, Prof. Gravett, John, and Makano for contributing. Yeah, there's no time to speak a lot, but I do just want to touch on a few points that were made. Also, sorry that Jet lost electricity and I had to move to my laptop towards the end. So I think I missed almost the most interesting part, speaking about dilemmas. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, yeah, just pulling a few things together, I think the words of Prof. Gravett really stuck with me. None of us have all the answers. And I think that's why we're here together, to think through initial teacher education, learning to teach, and how extended student teacher internships can make a contribution, and an effective and efficient contribution that can be scaled up. So in terms of, one of the questions is that was in the chat. I think what I didn't speak about too much is that two of the critical mechanisms of TICSA, and Prof. Gravett mentioned one, the community of practice. There's another, working groups, and this is really where different implementing organizations and different stakeholders of TICSA can come together and work through things that, yes, there's no standard on, but yes, as Makana says, there might be some non-negotiables, although when one looks at a context as diverse as South Africa, that's not always easy to identify. And one of the key themes that those working groups are working on is mentorship. So what is mentorship? Who gets to mentor? And what that should look like is one of the things that we hope to be providing critical shared experience and knowledge on in the coming year. I think two other issues is that the notion that this is not a linear line, that yes, 5 years, 2024 is coming. We might not all make it there, but it will come for many of us. But that there's not a straight line for TICSA and for extended student teacher internships, and what that might look like in 2024. And that's really important to hold. And I think that's one of the key lessons that any other collective impact project can take on board. And I think certainly the time is right, or the time is ripe for ECD. And I'm sure that if the correct leadership is there, it will come about. And any lessons learned from any other collective impact project, including TICSA, should be used. In that regard, I think I'll end there, Nick. There's a lot that one can talk about. There's many different ways in which we can speak about TICSA, but I just wanted to end to say thank you to everybody who joined. Thanks to everybody who asked questions. Thanks to all the organizers and everybody that made some time to join us here today.
Thank you very much. There will be an opportunity to just feedback on this. We do run these sessions at the end of every month, and the write-up from this, importantly, and the recording will be available, will be up on the Knowledge Hub, shared to all the participants as well. I'm sorry we've gone over slightly. I'm hoping it was a rewarding session. A final thank you to our three panelists I thought were excellent in offering, and to Zara for her perspective on TICSA itself. For the really wonderful insights that were shared. So thank you from my side, and yeah, signing off. Thank you very much.
Thank you.